And when we bump up into that fourth commandment, honor father and mother, and that's usually the first one parents teach their kids, the fourth commandment, honor father. I mean, that's more important than you shouldn't steal, shouldn't lie. You might even teach that one before you misuse the name of the Lord your God. You're going to say, hey, you need to honor father and mother. So they get that one right away.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode 43, brought to you by Cook's Holsters, American-made custom Kydex holsters with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee, cooksholsters.com. Welcome to the show. Let me begin with a special thank you for all of you who have downloaded and subscribed to the podcast wherever you found us, iTunes or Stitcher, TuneIn, Google Play, wherever. This podcast continues to grow, and I'm eternally grateful for your support and for the just awesome cast of contributors who make this show possible. October set a record for us for downloads, which September was a record, and the month before that. Every month we get bigger and bigger, and based on how November's going so far, we may break October's record by the end of the month, and I just cannot thank you enough for that support. For those of you who are new to the show, you're probably wondering, what is this? What are we all about? What is this Armed Lutheran thing? Well, Armed Lutheran Radio is about what our motto says: faith, firearms, and freedom. We talk about guns, the Second Amendment, the natural right of self-defense, and we discuss these issues in light of the gospel of Jesus Christ. There are a lot of liberal Christians who use God's word to justify their leftist views on everything from abortion to gender issues, the role of government, and gun rights. And it's why I left the evangelical church and became an Orthodox Lutheran. The focus should be on Christ. Now, I started the Armed Lutheran blog in 2012 because I wanted to explore what God's Word says and doesn't say about my interest in self-defense and gun rights and my desire to carry a gun for my own protection and the protection of my family. Well, the right to bear arms is, of course, constitutional, but is it Christian? Well, in the Lutheran tradition, if it's not specifically forbidden in the Bible, if it doesn't violate one of God's commandments, then we have the freedom as a Christian to choose to do it or not to do it. And guns are obviously not in the Bible, but the Bible isn't silent about the issue of the sanctity of life or the right of self-defense. And every week here on the show, we hope to give you information that you may not hear other places. And I hope you enjoy what you hear. I hope you find it informative. And if you've got questions or comments, I would love to hear from you. Visit our feedback page, www.armedlutheran.us/feedback. Send us an email, or there's a button you can push there to send a voice message just using the microphone on your computer or your portable device. Or you can give us a call at 888-571-5552 and leave a voicemail. And speaking of comments, on today's show, I'm going to be responding to some fan mail for a change. Haven't done that in a while. That'll be coming up later in the program. Sergeant Bill's Ballistic Minute today is about the tools that he takes with him to the range for practice. Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense has another self-defense tip this week about teaching your kids to stand up for themselves at an early age. And I've got a very special guest. My former pastor from North Carolina joins us to discuss gun-free zones and the Fourth Commandment. All that is straight ahead, right here on Armed Lutheran Radio.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
With those words, our founding fathers changed the world. They launched an experiment in freedom, where common lawful citizens are free to speak and gather and worship as they choose. But first among those freedoms is the one freedom that makes the rest possible. For 130 years, we've worked to preserve freedom first. I'm Wayne LaPierre of the National Rifle Association.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. You're listening to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. We've got a couple of pieces of listener mail I wanted to respond to. Haven't done that in a while, and I apologize for that. This first one, it comes to us from the Reverend Richard Boland, and thank you, Reverend, for sending the message. Mia Anstine is a member of my congregation in Colorado, where we are proud of Mia and her participation on Armed Lutheran. I pack a pistol every Sunday as a retired pastor in the congregation, with our LCMS congregation boldly proclaiming God's truth about the gospel and the truth about homosexual transgender foolishness and our opposition to the abortion industry. I feel it's imperative that we keep weapons at the ready should some crazy individual decide to take his hatred of our church's biblical position on these controversial issues out on our congregation. I hope and pray that I never have to use the weapon, but I fully intend to be prepared for any eventuality. Keep up the good work and help us all to be better prepared for any eventuality. Signed, Reverend Richard Boland. Reverend, thank you for your message. I appreciate it, and I totally agree with you. In this day and age, especially as unhinged as the left has become in many cases, you really can't take any chances. And with our church, as you say, boldly proclaiming the gospel and standing up for God's word against the word of the world, you just can't take any chances at all. And kudos to you for continuing to be the good shepherd for that congregation, even though you are retired. And we are excited and happy to have Mia as part of the group here at Armed Lutheran Radio. It's been a blessing to have her as a member of the cast. And this one comes from Sam Williams of Tupelo, Mississippi. Sam had the honor of meeting Sergeant Bill Silvia at the Fall Brawl IDPA Championship. He says, being raised LCMS, I had to do a double take when I saw his Lutheran Rose and Cross 1911s. That's on our jerseys. I had no idea I'd only be more impressed when I saw the back of his jersey. I'm from Northeast Mississippi, and Lutherans, much less LCMS, are in short supply, so I found your podcasts and page very informative and inspirational. How much of the Augsburg Confession do I have to recite to make the Armed Lutheran shooting team? Well, there's no requirement, although I don't know. I may come up with a test just to see if you qualify. I hate that I missed seeing you, Sam, at the match, and I'm glad you came up and introduced yourself. And I really appreciate your support for the show. We since sort of texted back and forth, and he mentioned, says, the Fall Brawl was great, but my poor 1911 decided to give up the ghost on the first stage. Needless to say, it was a long day, but the company was great. And this comment later I wanted to share, and I really do wholeheartedly appreciate this. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. Your podcast is probably the best IDP-related one I've found so far. USPSA has Steve Anderson. Now we have you guys. Keep up the good work. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that, because I have a ton of respect for Steve Anderson. I love his books. I use his training routines. Of course, you'll probably hear the similarities between the Ballistic Minute and some of what you hear on Steve Anderson's shooting show. Sergeant Bill is, of course, a big fan and turned me on to Steve Anderson's show. So that is high praise, and I really appreciate it, and I know Sergeant Bill does as well. You're going to hear Sam Williams next week. We have a special shooters roundtable. We're going to be getting a bunch of IDPA shooters together to talk about the 2016 season that we just all finished up, and to look forward to next year, share some funny stories, and have a few laughs at my expense. And we're doing that in next week's show, kind of shaking things up, a little bit of a different show, and Sam Williams has agreed to join us as part of that roundtable, so look forward to that next week. Thank you, Sam, for your kind words, and and for your support of the show. Thank you for coming over and speaking howdy to Sergeant Bill at the Fall Brawl. I hate I missed you. I look forward to seeing you at a future match. And for those of you who are interested in competing for the Armed Lutheran shooting team, let me know. Send us an email and we'll see if we can't work something out. I hadn't really considered about expanding the team, but maybe we'll do that for next year and work out a way that you too can join the Armed Lutheran shooting team. If you're interested in just sending us a voicemail or an email that you'd like, you got a question, you got a comment, please feel free to visit the feedback page and send us a message. We'd love to hear from you. There's a phone number where you can leave us a voicemail. There's a button you can push and just leave us a voice message, or you can send us an email or send us a message through the Facebook page. We'd love to hear from you, and we will respond to you in a future episode on the show. Thank you all for your comments. Over and above our own body, spouse, and temporal possessions, we have another treasure: honor and a good reputation. If you're forced to use your firearm in self-defense, it's very likely that you will have to fight to clear your name after the fight for your life is over. Do you have $10,000 on hand to retain an attorney? Have you got cash readily available to make bail? Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network can give you peace of mind knowing that you have the financial and legal assistance to face this new threat to your liberty, your property, and your good name. Become a member today for just $135 a year by visiting armedcitizensnetwork.com and using the tracking code 15625 or Paul Lathrop, that's L-A-T-H-R-O-P, when you sign up. Can you survive the legal aftermath of self-defense? Join Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network today. armedcitizensnetwork.com. Use the tracking code 15625 or Paul Lathrop. armedcitizensnetwork.com.
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. This is Armed Lutheran Radio. It's time for this week's self-defense tip from Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense.
Hey folks, this is Aaron Israel with Fundamental Defense here with your personal defense tip of the week. Today I want to talk to you about teaching your kids to stand up for themselves from an early age. I have a young daughter who just entered kindergarten this year. When my wife got a recent progress report from her kindergarten teacher, we were surprised to learn that the area that her teacher suggested she needed the most improvement on was in standing up for herself when she's wronged by other kids in her class. Now, in kindergarten, you can probably picture little boys and little girls taking each other's toys or stealing treats out of each other's lunchboxes, or even at the extreme, potentially hitting or kicking each other, getting in fights on the playground, that sort of thing. Now, I don't have to tell you that we live in a society where most of the time kids are taught from an early age to stand down and refuse to fight back in almost all of those situations, which is why I ought to point out reflects good on my daughter's teacher for not being a person that teaches those shoddy personal defense principles. She's a rare bird, seeing that not standing up for yourself is a bad thing in this day and age, and so I commend her for that. And if you've got a teacher who points those type of things out, pat them on the back and tell them how much you appreciate them. The ironic thing is that the same society that by and large tells kids to stand down moans and groans about rape culture and people being victimized. And where do you think these things start? Well, they start in kindergarten when kids are first learning how to defend themselves and what's worth standing up for. When you're on the playground and you let that bully take a toy from you or push you down into the dirt, steal your treat from your lunchbox, etc., it starts when you stand idly by when those little punk kids mess with the special needs kid and you don't stick up for them. All of those situations are where victimhood is built, and that's the beginnings of a lifetime of potentially being a statistic or a victim, and we don't want that for our kids, so we got to start them off in the other direction as early as possible. We as parents have to teach our kids about sticking up for themselves at an early age. That starts with talking about the basic concept of property. I think we're a little bit too free with the concept of quote-unquote sharing. We tell kids to share their toys, share with your friends. Let's share with the little girl. You know, that's your toy, but you need to share it. And that's good, but if we aren't careful, it can come to the point where they expect to have things that don't belong to them shared with them. And then you get that tantrum behavior that, well, Billy doesn't want to share his train, so I'm going to have a big fit, and we're going to have a big blowout because it's my turn, and he doesn't want to give me a turn, and you're supposed to share, and you need to share. You hear that word share thrown about all over the place. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't tell your kids to share. Sharing is a good thing. It's a good Christian concept, but you should explain to them the concept of ownership and property at the same time, and that while you should be charitable with the property that you own, you can't expect others to always be charitable with the things that they own, and you don't have any entitlement to the things that other people own. And if you teach them that concept of ownership and property at a very early age, then they're not going to be entitled, and they're not going to want to fight about stuff when they don't get their turn, quote unquote, because you don't necessarily get a turn if it's not your thing. So be charitable with the things that you got, but don't expect other people to share with you, and that's the message you got to send to your kids from a very early age. From the property concept, then it goes to defending your person, defending your body. At no point should we tell children that they should accept being pushed around by another child. If someone pushes my daughter around, she knows even at the age of 5, especially if it involves getting physical, that that's assault. Now, I don't use the word assault, but she knows that that's not acceptable, and I expect her to be willing to fight back. I told her something along the lines of, you better not start a fight, but you darn sure better finish it if someone picks a fight with you and hits you first. Now, when you instill these basic concepts of personal defense, you're building kids who will grow up refusing to be victimized. If you fail to teach these lessons, you're potentially creating those victim statistics that they're going to grow up not standing up for themselves. Now, don't get me wrong. These aren't lectures that I'm giving to my daughter out of the blue. Teachable moments are abundant, and they'll present themselves. We just have to take advantage of them. So understand that taking this stand with your kids also may mean that you're going to have to talk to the principal at some point, because these schools have these asinine zero tolerance policies 99% of the time. If you're a good parent, embrace that, own it, and be proud to do it if that situation ever arises. If my daughter gets sent home for defending herself from physical violence when she was in the right, I am more than happy to stick up for her when the principal calls. In fact, I welcome that day if it ever comes. I'd rather do that than find out she's been victimized and never spoke up and never took ownership of the situation and never stood up for herself and defended herself. Teaching kids to respect their bodies and respect their property and to respect the bodies and property of other kids will go significantly to decreasing the likelihood that they'll be victims of a range of horrific situations that you read about in the news. When you read about these child sexual assaults, when you read about these kids that grow up and bad things happen to them in college campuses and that sort of thing. This all starts at a very young age. So teach your kids to stick up for themselves with every teachable moment that you get, even when they're toddlers, and you're going to be far better off, and you're going to prepare them for what's out there. So teach your kids about property, teach them about personal defense, starting with an early age. Take advantage of those teachable moments, and you're going to be raising them to be strong individuals who can make it in this fallen, sinful world. Don't let them be sucked into the growing victim culture, and it starts today. That's your personal defense tip of the week. Thanks for tuning in.
Aaron Israel is a Personal Defense Network contributor and owner of Fundamental Defense. You can find out more and sign up for any of Aaron's classes at fundamentaldefense.com.
It's the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Needs. I'm Alan Gottlieb, founder of the Second Amendment Foundation. When someone says we don't need that kind of gun, remind them the Founding Fathers determined what rights our Constitution should protect. There's a world of difference between rights and needs. It is not the function of government to tell us what we need or what we don't. Certainly no one needs an assault rifle or a Saturday Night Special, or for that matter, no one needs a Corvette with a high-capacity horsepower engine capable of speeds to 150 miles per hour. But in the hands of honest, responsible individuals, we have the right of choice. We have the right to read books others don't like. We have the right to listen to any radio program we choose. We have the right to dress the way we want to. We also have the right to own firearms of our choice. So the next time someone tells you, you don't need something, tell them it's the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Needs. Join the Second Amendment Foundation today so that this message and our Bill of Rights might live. Call 425-454-7012. That's 425-454-7012.
Time now for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Silvia.
Hey, I'm Sergeant Bill. This is your Ballistic Minute. had a lot of people asking me lately what I take to the range with me when I go practice. So here's what I carry for training tools in my range bag. Let me start off by saying I have a separate duffel bag just for practice range stuff. It's got most of this equipment I'm going to list in there. And when I go to the range, I grab that and throw it in my truck. Okay, so obviously I bring a shot timer so that I can have a start beep to get used to, starting at the start beep. I can record times if I feel like it, or, check how I'm doing and see if I'm getting better at drills or whatever I'm doing. I like to occasionally record using my smartphone, some video. So I have a tripod in there, just a cheap $10 Walmart tripod, just enough that I can set it, hit record, film a drill or something that I'm doing so I can go back and look at it later. And when I go look at it later, I use the Max Michel Shot Coach app. This app allows you to mark your shots, and so you can, have it in the video showing where your splits are, where your transitions are, and it keeps a track and tally of that stuff, which is really good to see what you're doing to help get you more consistent and see, what your times are and what you can improve on and what you are doing well. Well, I bring targets. Some are paper, some are cardboard. I also will print off some practice targets on a regular sheet of paper that I've gotten from the internet that'll have like 2-inch dots. They have a center, which is like an 8-inch target with a 1-inch grids on it, so that if I need to zero, I can tell how far I need to zero. Sometimes I'll print off some drills or even some games. Little shooting games and drills and stuff, so that it's something new that you can try out, keeps fresh and fun. I don't use pasters. I'll bring a roll of brown tape and just tear it off to cover the holes so I can continue using targets. It's a lot cheaper and it's just a lot easier. Shoot in Texas, it's pretty hot for more than half of the year, so obviously you got to bring something to drink and a towel. I have a heavy-duty stapler and some extra staples so I can put those targets up on the target sticks in the stands. I also bring paint, a can of white spray paint and a can of black spray paint. The white is for if I'm shooting steel, I can repaint it. Makes it a lot easier to see your hits. And the black paint is if I want to paint some hardcover on a target. I also bring a small tool kit because, stuff breaks. And I recently was shooting and had a front sight fly off a gun. And you need to be able to, if you can find it, be able to put it back on so you can continue training. I also bring lots of mags and a mag loader, which I use an Uplula or Maglula Uplula loader. It makes loading lots of mags a lot easier, a lot quicker. Add to that a squib rod and some oil and grease. Squib rod is simply a 12-inch piece of brass rod that is, I think the diameter is like 0.32, so it'll fit in pretty much any barrel, and I can use it to bang on any squibs I might get, which I haven't had any yet, thank goodness, but it's always good to have. I've used it several times on other people's guns, so it comes in very handy. I also put a Sharpie in there so that if there's something on the target, I want to circle a group or I want to check off some shots, it actually comes in quite handy. And last but not least, I reload, so I put a brass bag so that I can pick up all my brass when I'm done. It's got a mesh bottom, so you can shake it, and it knocks a lot of the debris out, which is pretty good. So, what do you have in your range training bag? Did I miss anything that you've got? This has been your Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill.
Sergeant Bill Silvia is a 15-year veteran of the Dallas Police Department and masterclass competitive shooter. You can watch Sergeant Bill's shooting videos at armedlutheran.us/Sergeant Bill.
Hi, I'm Bob Main. Now that you have your concealed carry license, I think you and I probably both know that class probably wasn't really training. Have you ever thought about getting some training beyond your concealed carry license? Well, that's why Ben Branham and I decided to call our classes Beyond Concealed Carry. We're going to teach you how to move and shoot, how to shoot one-handed, even how to shoot and make hits without the use of your sights. And if that's something for you and you think you'd like to take advantage of that, as a Self-Defense Radio Network listener, you can get nice discounts on the classes and the subsequent video programs for reinforcement. All you have to do is visit the listener discount page at selfdefenseradio.net and put in the password SDRN, all lowercase. Again, the listener discount page and all lowercase SDRN. Hope to see you at a class soon.
So you have your concealed carry permit or license to carry. Now what? Now you need a good holster. Not one of those cheap neoprene prophylactic holsters you can buy in the big box stores. You need a holster custom built for the firearm you intend to carry every day. Check out cooksholsters.com. Made in the USA, Cooks holsters are available in a wide range of colors and designs for inside the waistband or outside waistband carry. They carry a lifetime warranty against defects and a 100% satisfaction guaranteed. Visit www.cooksholsters.com and use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST and take 15% off everything in the store. You put in the time and effort to legally carry a firearm for personal protection. Protect your firearm with a custom holster from cooksholsters.com.
Your support is vital to this Christian-centered pro-gun ministry. Help support Armed Lutheran Radio by visiting patreon.com/Armed Lutheran and become a sponsor today.
Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. As we all recognize, gun-free zones are really just a misguided attempt by politicians to create safe spaces where people can be free from gun violence. But the problem that we all recognize is that laws and signs don't deter evil, and those kinds of places, whether they're schools or malls or churches or hospitals, are actually just target-rich environments for predators. A common response to these kinds of places that you often hear is the refrain, "I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6." But is that really a good way that we as Christian gun owners should view this issue? To discuss this issue, I've got my favorite Lutheran pastor with me today. Ralph Abernethy of Mount Olive Lutheran Church in Newton, North Carolina is with us. He was my home church pastor back in North Carolina. He's the pastor who catechized and confirmed my son. He baptized my daughter, and that's why he has a special place in my heart. Pastor, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lloyd. Good to be here. And it was a privilege catechizing Reagan and baptizing Rylan.
Thank you.
I missed Reagan. I missed Rylan. I look at Reagan's photographs that are posted, and I think, how did this little guy get so tall? And Rylan, she's grown up to be a beautiful young lady, but I still remember her. In the middle of the sermon, here she would come. I thought it was neat. And then for a while, at the end of the service, she would say hello by lifting up her dress over her head.
Oh, Lord.
But again, we love and miss you guys.
Thank you. We love you too. Let's start talking about gun-free zones. I was thinking of this originally in terms of the Fourth Commandment, but you brought up the Fifth as well when we were talking about it before the show. So let's start with the Fourth. Honor your father and your mother, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. What does that have to do with gun-free zones?
Okay, let me read the Small Catechism's explanation of that commandment. We should fear and love God so that we do not despise or anger our parents and other authorities, but honor them, serve and obey them, love and cherish them. And in the Large Catechism, Luther explains who these other authorities are. Other authorities are teachers in school. They can be a pastor, Sunday school teacher. Other authorities would also be the government. The government is an authority, civil government, instituted by God for the well-being of our civil order here.
Okay, so gun-free zones come in several different flavors, if you will. They're those that are established by law, those that might be established by our employers, and those established by private businesses or private citizens. So let's look at each of those with the Fourth Commandment in mind. Gun-free zones established by law, for example, schools or in Texas, anywhere that you have the 30-06 or 30-07 signs, or in places like North Carolina, basically anywhere that you have a no-gun sign carries the weight of law. I would assume the Fourth Commandment is pretty clear on this one.
Yeah, and I'm going to refer to the Large Catechism here. In it, Luther talks about obedience to civil government and says, here, Father is not one person from a single family, but it means that many people the Father has as tenants, citizens, or subjects. Through them, as through our parents, God gives to us food, house, and home, protection, and security. They, those in government, bear such name and title with all honor as their highest dignity, that it is our duty to honor them and to value them greatly. So, we are called to obedience to civil government. And Luther takes this, oddly enough, from the Scriptures. Imagine Luther.
Imagine that.
Yeah, golly gosh. Romans 13 in particular, 1 through 7 says, let every person be subject to the governing authorities. Now, first we have to understand that St. Paul is addressing Christians here, addressing the church as a whole. Mm-hmm. So that is an important distinction we have to make. For there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. Then Paul goes on to explain the purpose of civil government. Rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is an authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his, that is, the authority's approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. So right there you have the two main functions of civil government: to reward those who do good and to punish those who do evil. To maintain God's civil order in a world that is fallen, in a world that resists that order. Again, you have to understand that St. Paul is addressing the church here, more so than the individual Christian believer. Let's put it this way. Martin Luther really emphasized the doctrine of the two kingdoms. Right. There was the kingdom of the right and the kingdom of the left. The kingdom of the right is the spiritual kingdom. It is the kingdom of grace. It is the church's domain, or rather, it is God's domain through the church. The kingdom of the left is civil government, and again, instituted by God for the reward of those who do well and the punishment of those who do wrong. You cannot mix the two, which is the case many times in the God and country movement in this country. They are to be distinct. Neither one is to encroach upon the duties and responsibilities of the other, nor to restrict the legitimate duties and responsibilities of the other. Now, you and I and all your listeners are citizens of two kingdoms. Right. As Christians, we are citizens of the kingdom of the right. Our ultimate loyalty is to this kingdom. But in the political realm, the civil realm, we are also citizens of that nation in which we reside and are responsible to obey the laws of that nation insofar as those laws do not conflict with the higher laws of God.
Something that just came to mind was some would argue that, well, these laws aren't really moral because they prevent me the opportunity to defend myself and my family in the public space.
Okay, you're talking about the laws concerning gun-free zones?
Yes.
Well, let's examine that. Does a gun-free zone in, say, a school or a government building prevent you from defending your family? Does the government have a right to implement these gun-free zones. Now, obviously, what occurred at Newtown, if there had been people armed with guns early on, that tragedy would not have unfolded the way that it did.
Right.
And I think that would have been good if people had been armed with guns to protect the students and teachers. But as it is, the government says no, and we have to determine how we as Christians approach this. Now, again, we are citizens of two kingdoms, and we can vote for, we can work for legislation that would expand the zones in which guns can legally be carried, again, for the defense of those who could fall victims to violence.
So the best way to change things is not to break the law, but to work within the kingdom of the left and change the laws that are in place currently.
That's what I would say. We have a unique responsibility and privilege as citizens of what is supposed to be a free democratic country. We have the right and privilege of voting. Supposedly, we can make our voices heard. And when we make our voices heard, we do so with Christian love, but we do not remove ourselves from the kingdom of the left. Again, God has placed us here, and we should responsibly exercise these privileges, rights, and responsibilities. There are certain brands of Christianity that are ultra-pacifistic, that actually want nothing at all to do with the government. They think civil government is an evil. Now, obviously, it can be evil. It can become demonic.
Right.
But again, God has established civil government for the benefit of society. It goes back to after the flood. God tells Noah, for your lifeblood, I will require reckoning from every beast. I will require it from man. From his fellow man, I will require a reckoning for the life of man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. God made man in his own image. Again, this goes back to the state's calling to bear the sword for the punishment of evildoers. And as citizens of the state, we have the responsibility to see that that is done. Not in an overbearing manner, not in an unloving manner, but it's unloving to leave our citizens who may be subjected to violence unprotected. And part of that protection does come from those who bear firearms, concealed carry.
We talked a little about vocation with Pastor Wolfmueller on one of our one episode. We talked about the three kingdoms, or the three estates.
Yes.
And we talked about how Luther recognized that those three estates, you can be a member of all three of them. You're obviously a member of the family. You're a member. You can be a member of your church. You could also serve in government. You unlike the old medieval way of thinking about it, you didn't have to leave one to join the other, right? So
that's right.
And we talked about how when you are faced with an emergency, sometimes those, whatever your vocation is, sort of may change. If you drive up on a car accident, suddenly you're no longer just a father or a car driver or a pizza delivery guy, or you're a doctor suddenly.
Yeah.
If you're in a situation where someone is trying to harm your neighbors with a gun, and by neighbors I'm using the biblical term, or with some other kind of weapon, if they're committing an act of violence against your neighbor, suddenly you're no longer just that other guy, that stranger. Suddenly you're a policeman.
Yes.
Especially if you are one of the responsible people that actually has a concealed carry permit and is carrying a gun every day.
Yes. And again, Luther says the same thing in his explanation to the Fifth Commandment. We should fear and love God so that we do not hurt or harm our neighbor in his body, but help and befriend him in every bodily need, or in every need and danger of life and body. So you're exactly right. When we see our neighbor, which is a broad term, not the person living next door to us or across a backyard fence, when we see our neighbor in danger, it is our calling to come to that neighbor's aid. And, handguns are a part of that.
Which is part of why we as Christians should oppose gun-free zones and work within that left-hand kingdom to overturn them and abolish them. It prevents us from coming to the aid of our neighbors.
Yes.
So the second kind of gun-free zone you're likely to run into, and you're more likely to run into this one, is the private business with private property, where say a place like Target or Home Depot or Starbucks, those are the more famous ones where the company has actually come out and expressed their policy that, hey, don't bring your guns into our stores, but they don't necessarily post a sign. The signs are not backed, or if they do have a sign, it's not backed by law. What is our responsibility there, or how should we view those places as Christian gun owners?
It's my understanding, you explained this to me, that, well, you just said it, that that policy and any signs they may put up have no legal authority behind them. It is just the store policy. Mm-hmm. I would imagine in any Target at any time during the day, there are people who carry concealed weapons.
But as a Christian, if I'm doing that, am I violating the Fourth Commandment?
I don't see Target as being one of the other authorities we should love and cherish, respect, and obey.
Right.
Now,
not to single out Target here, but any business that has a policy like that.
Yes. Lou's Bar and Grill.
Yeah.
Of course, Lou's Bar and Grill wouldn't have such a policy.
So that brings us to the next sort of gun-free zone, which is the workplace. What if you were the employee at Lou's Bar and Grill, and what if Lou has a policy against guns in the workplace? Maybe it's not illegal for you to have guns in his business. Maybe he doesn't even post signs, but he has a company policy that says you as an employee can't bring a gun to work. Like my boss, for example, has no written policy even, but he has made it clear in company meetings, guns are not allowed.
Well, in the case of Lou's Bar and Grill, hopefully each employee has been outfitted with a big baseball bat in that case. Luther would say, and the scriptures would say, that employees are subject to their employers, mm-hmm. and that in that case there should be obedience to the company's official policy. Now, whether that's wise, that's open to debate. These days, I don't think it's necessarily wise. I think it's making the employees of the company vulnerable. Right. But nonetheless, if you expect to work for that company, if you draw your income from that company so you can support your family and do good in society, the better thing to do, and I think the scriptural thing to do, would be to honor that company's policy. And of course, I could turn it around on you and say, how do you approach that?
I approach it exactly as you described it. I honor the policy, and as we talked about earlier, I think if it's intolerable to you, you should probably find another place to work.
Yes.
Or as we discussed earlier in the show, work within that left-hand kingdom to discuss with your employer, talk to him about the policy, and see if you can't convince him to change his ways or change his mind. And if that's not possible, then you either comply with it or you find somewhere else to work.
Yeah, you may have more success convincing Lou to allow his employees to carry guns than you would a large company corporation.
Right.
So go work at Lou's.
Right, exactly. Lou seems more reasonable, yes.
Yes.
What about the question of guns in churches? Now, some states have laws that don't permit you to carry a gun in church.
Not know that.
That's true. Many states do not permit you by law to carry a gun in church. That's one of the state mandated gun-free zones. But others do not put that sort of stricture on churches, and they leave it to the individual churches to decide. Some people would say, guns have no place in church. What do you say to that?
Well, let me tell you about one of my professors of theology at Concordia Fort Wayne. He would carry a gun to class. It was open carry. He also served a small church near the seminary, and he carried a gun into the pulpit. As we know, there have been many incidents of violence in churches, shooters. People die. And if we in the church don't take the steps to defend our people, after all, we defend them by proclaiming Christ to them. But in a society in which violence is becoming increasingly common, I think it is well and good for churches to have people who are armed, because one never knows when an active shooter situation may develop, particularly in an age of terror such as we are in.
Right.
Now, there are Christians who think guns and Christianity do not belong together. There was a gentleman from another congregation here when he found out that we had a group of members, and you orchestrated this, a group of members who were going to one of the local shooting ranges.
Mm-hmm.
And this particular person, again, he was not a member of our congregation, thought that was horrible. For one thing, we went for a good time.
Mm-hmm.
We also went to practice and develop our proficiency with firearms in case we ever needed to use those firearms in self-defense or to defend those who would otherwise likely fall victims to violence.
Yep.
If I may say so, this may be a little off track.
That's fine.
You were the first one to get me in a shooting range. And one of the things I noticed was how respectful the owner and the employees of that range were of guns, and wanting to make sure that the people who came in used those guns in a safe, responsible manner. As I recall, I had to watch several videos and sign several papers before I was even allowed on the range.
Mm-hmm.
So the emphasis there is safety and responsibility. And as I recall, well, maybe it's you who told me this, that pulling out your gun and using it is the course of last resort.
Right.
And when you pull it out, when you put the finger on the trigger, you need to be sure that this is serious business, and you're going to take steps to defend yourself or someone else.
Yeah, quick shout out to the range that we attended, Jack Simons at Springs Road Gun Club. Great guy and very, very safety conscious. Welcomed us our weekly or monthly range nights. We had a great time. You're absolutely right that as Aaron Israel, one of our co-hosts or co-contributors, says every so often, the gun is really an answer to a small subset of problems that you might face in a self-defense situation. It's the tool of last resort.
Yes.
And if you can extricate yourself from that situation without having to use it, that's the better course of action. But
yes.
If you're going to draw it, you had better be ready to use it.
Well, let me turn this around on you.
Okay.
But I recall you saying, assuming my memory is not failing me, which is possible at my age, that if you were forced to use a gun on someone, you would first try to disable them without killing them, and then you would visit them in prison and share the gospel with them. Now, am I remembering correctly, or is that way off base?
Well, it's close. The first thing you hear a lot of people will say you shoot to kill, right? If you're threatened, if somebody comes in your home or somebody's trying to attack you with a weapon, that you shoot to kill, and that's not correct. What you're really trying to do is you're trying to, as Aaron said, I took one of Aaron's classes over the weekend, and he kept using this term, you shoot until the bad guy stops doing bad guy things. As many rounds as it might take. If it takes one round and he drops the gun and runs away, or if he sees the gun and gives up, that's fine. But if it takes 7, 8, 10, if it takes you emptying the magazine into him before he stops trying to hurt you or hurt your family or the people around you, then that's what it takes. If he happens to die in the process, that's unfortunate, and you pray for him, but he sort of brought that on himself. And yes, and this was something interesting that in that book, A Time to Kill by Greg Hopkins, he talks about in one of the chapters, he talks about going above and beyond just stopping the criminal, but once they're stopped and once they're under control and they have been taken off to the hospital or sent off to jail, how many of us think to go visit that person in the hospital and say, I forgive you. I'm here to see how you're doing, and to show that person that you care about them as a person. Now, you may be the first person that ever does that, and it may not make a difference, but you never know.
Well, and that's reflecting the attitude of Christ, who came into a world that was hostile to God, enemies with God. Mm-hmm. He came to be crucified by that world, to die for the world's sins. He came to us even though we were rebellious. He comes to us in his word and sacraments, even though by nature we are enemies of God.
Right.
He comes to us, and the situation you describe is reflecting the love and self-giving of Christ. It's kind of like Matthew 25. I was in prison, and you visited me. Mm-hmm. And now you visited me when I had attempted to do such a horrible thing to you or members of your family.
Yep.
That's love in action.
Ralph Abernethy is the pastor at Mount Olive Lutheran Church in Newton, North Carolina. Please visit www.mountolivenewton.org for more information. Pastor, Christ blessings to you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you coming on. It's great to hear from you again.
Well, thank you, Lloyd, and Christ blessings to you and your family. And, you're using the gifts God has given you in multiple vocations, and this podcast is one of those vocations. So thanks be to God for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. Thank you to all of my contributors, Sergeant Bill Silvia, Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense, and our special guest, Pastor Ralph Abernethy of Mount Olive Lutheran Church in Newton, North Carolina. Thank you for joining us today. And be sure to tune in next week. Got a special episode, a Shooters Roundtable, as we'll be looking back at the 2016 IDPA season and looking forward to 2017. We'll be having a lot of fun along the way. Don't miss that next week right here on Armed Lutheran Radio. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and TuneIn. This podcast is made possible by Cook's Holsters and contributions from listeners like you.